About a century ago, the residents of Malaga Island, a racially mixed settlement just across from Sebasco in Phippsburg, Maine, were removed by order of the state.
Governor Plaisted made a mistake with this island. He's not here any longer to respond to people and apologize.
Newspapers of the time talk about the shameful disgrace of Malaga. More modern coverage has often been just as untruthful and sensational, calling it Scandal Island. What really happened on Malaga? Recently purchased for preservation by the Maine Coast Heritage Trust, the small island is only a half-mile long and a quarter-mile wide and sits very close to the mainland.
So basically, right now, you're looking across the whole north end of the island, and you're looking from this beach right here. This is right beside the Griffin House.
Without digging up or disturbing the site, Nathan Hamilton, an archaeologist from USM, has worked with his colleagues and their students to reconstruct the location and nature of the Malaga settlement.
The house sat, see this little square crown right here? This island has never been plowed. This island has not been disturbed since 1912. That's what makes it a gem. We're looking at John and Rosilla Eason standing in front of their house, and it sat right on this crown of land. This is the point of land that's coming out that you can see in the distance, right behind the clothesline that matches up exactly with the positioning of this picture.
One of the most common misconceptions, even today, is that the black inhabitants of Malaga were runaway slaves. This is not true. Although people didn't begin living on the island until around 1860, many of the residents were descended from families in the area, some going back to the 1700s and the time of the American Revolution.
This is a community of people who were tied into the local landscape, who found that it was a very strategic point for fishing, and it was also outside of the view of most of the community.
As immigrants flooded the U.S. in the late 1800s, cultural differences raised Anglo-American fears that non-whites would destroy Anglo-Saxon heritage. They used a pseudo-scientific theory called eugenics to justify racism, saying such things as poverty and shiftlessness were inherited racial traits. Even many do-good reformers cited these theories as they worked to clean up slums. Malaga Island began to be seen in this light.
My great-grandfather was Scottish-Irish. Of course, there was people of color. There was the Penobscot Indian, had some representation there. There was a lot of ethnic groups. And it was all people who came together in an integrated society with no place else to go.
When somebody married a half-black, half-white woman, they became an outcast. They became an outcast with their church. A lot has been written about where people are marginalized relative to the communities.
Although most jobs at the time were closed to people of color, several residents found seasonal work on nearby farms and at local resort hotels. In the 1900 census, most Malaga Islanders were listed as making their living from fishing. One, John Eason, worked as a mason.
We're finding lots of materials that indicate special activities. What's happening at Eason's house? There's more food remains, there's more coal from heating. He was permanently there. There's lots of nails from construction.
It's believed that Eliza Griffin took in laundry from the mainland.
Over here at the Griffin house, where she was doing laundry and repairing clothes, we found lots of buttons. So we're finding the kind of things that confirm what is the anticipated lifestyle of the individuals living in the houses. There's an awful lot of people that were living on the edge of the Maine coast, and I think there's an awful lot of people that are still right on the edge here today. It's a hard place to make a living. It has been for thousands of years, but it's also got a lot of resources if you're tied into them.
The economic situation in Maine worsened at the end of the 1800s. As coastal towns like Phippsburg experienced a downturn in shipbuilding and fishing, jobs were lost. Competition for remaining resources increased, and many more families required financial assistance from their towns. At that time, there were no federal welfare or unemployment programs. Towns had either to raise taxes to care for their poor, hand out supplies, or take the needy into their homes. Phippsburg taxpayers said they just couldn't afford to support the Malaga Islanders. Even as the economic forces of a downturn were affecting the coast, a new economic boom for land developers hit. With steamboat excursions to nearby resorts at Popham Beach, Small Point, Sabasco, and further up the New Meadows River, more and more people visited and then wanted to own a little piece of paradise.
Real estate brokers from Massachusetts and Boston area were looking to set up cottages and sell property, which meant that they had to clean up the landscape a little bit from the locals.
Although people had been squatting on Maine's unowned islands for centuries, now deeds were produced, islands bought and sold. A possible resort was rumored to be built in the area of Malaga. Along with the increasing prejudice against the islanders caused by the eugenics rhetoric of the time, economic and political forces came to a head for Malaga when Phippsburg claimed that the island was not part of their town.
The island people was costing the town of Phippsburg a lot of money. They thought if they could break the community up and get the people on the mainland, that it would cost the state less money, which we believe in fact was not true. It cost them more to move them off the island than it did if they'd have stayed on the island.
It was ruled that Phippsburg did have jurisdiction over the island. Around this same time, a missionary, Captain Lane, who summered nearby, got involved in the welfare of Malaga. The Malaga children had been attending school across the channel in Sabasco, but in 1906, Lane and his wife Lucy set up a school on Malaga in a room of the McKinney's house. Within a couple of years, the missionaries built an actual schoolhouse on the island, but as they sent out postcards and messages to raise money, Malaga became even bigger news.
This is something that was grabbed a hold of by Portland and Boston newspapers, and they just didn't seem to want to let this story go. Every picture, the terrible conditions of the Negro on Malaga Island.
Ironically, because the newspapers followed each step of the story, Malaga is one of the only examples in the United States of well-documented rural black American life in the early 1900s.
You'll find references to African Americans in the landscape in the history books, but nothing is told of their story. Because they were marginalized in life and marginalized in history, this case is a bit unique. Because the newspapers focused in on it, it was marginal, but it was documented.
In 1911, Governor Plaisted visited the island and declared that the islanders should be moved. The state bought the island in what was probably an illegal deal and evicted the 33 residents. Each of the families received a small fee, and the island was resold at auction. The Malaga settlement had lasted about 52 years. Since most of the houses had been brought to the island over the ice, they had no foundations and were easy to move. Some residents put their houses on rafts and found new locations for them nearby. Others were met with angry resistance. The buildings not taken away were torn down, except the schoolhouse, which was carried to Loud's Island in Muscongas Bay to become a church. 8 black and Native American residents were institutionalized at Pineland, the main school for the feeble-minded, even though 6 of the 8 were of normal intelligence. The remains of 17 graves from the little cemetery on Malaga were dug up, mixed into 5 coffins, and transferred to the Pineland Cemetery. Ironically, the island was never developed, Fishermen continue to store traps along the shore, but no one has lived on Malaga since.